Well, hello. Welcome to Vancouver and welcome to Regent College, a divinity school. They're having summer session right now. And this is where I'm having my current show called Lifelight. It's up here in this brilliantly lit gallery. And it's a pretty amazing space. On the other side here, you can see, maybe you can't, in the distance, the mountains, but it's sort of difficult. We're going to be having an artist talk here shortly at 2 o'clock, so I hope you can come back. And I hope, hopefully, that all of these seats will be filled. So let me give you just a quick tour of what's going on here. This is the entrance. Excuse some of the bags. I'm doing some last-minute preparations. And this is a dual show, so I have pieces both from my Enlightenment series as well as my Out of the Darkness series. So these first pieces are Enlightenment, and this first piece here is from Bologna. It's called Illuminoso, and it is from the library there. These three pieces are actually new. They come from the same source image, which is the Church of All Nations in Jerusalem. I'm very pleased at how these turned out. They make a wonderful triptych for anybody that wants three pieces of a smaller size. This one happens to be my favorite just because of the erratic geometry. This one here I've had in a show before at the Dal Schindell Gallery. It is from a synagogue in Prague, the Jubilee Synagogue. But there's something about those tones and colors and the circles that repeat that is just very calming. But I'm going to jump into now my Out of the Darkness series. And what I've decided to do this time is actually group them in triptychs. So this one, I might have to step back a bit, is the Israel triptych. And this will probably be the major topic of our presentation this afternoon because I have a special guest who came up. She has nicely supplied the source image for the one on the right. Her name is Amanda Hope Haley. She's the red-haired archaeologist from Chattanooga, Tennessee. But she wrote a book about archaeology in Israel, and she was lucky enough to go to Hebron. And Hebron is the image on the right. Apparently it is pronounced Hebron. The image on the left is actually Tel Aviv. And the image in the middle, although I didn't go to Baghdad, is called Baghdad. And it was based on an Iraqi Jewish wedding dress. And you can almost see that it looks lace-like. But anyways, this triptych from Israel is supposed to document and commemorate the plight of all people living in that area. Not only the Jews, but as well, there have been several Palestinians hurt, and pain is universal. And we shouldn't necessarily, my series does not take sides. And it's also very secular. So I'm trying to show both of those aspects here. Smaller pieces here. This is actually, when you have four pieces together, it's called a polyptych. But I have these together because they seem to represent something that has changed things politically. The top left is Santiago, Chile. We just recently went to Chile. And the one on the bottom right here is Buenos Aires. The one in Chile actually just represents the death of one person, but through that death, which was a horrible homophobic attack, all sorts of laws protecting LGBT and others were reenacted, almost like enacted immediately. The piece from Buenos Aires is a commemoration of the 30,000 people who disappeared under the dictatorship of that time, the 70s and 80s. And my point here is, whether it be one or 30,000, pain is pain. It's not really quantifiable. And both have left an indelible mark on that society. So it's almost dealing with the collective trauma for those people in that community, but also the consequences of it. And both countries have dealt with this very well. They have shown changes for this, and Argentina has done incredibly well with, I'm trying to think of the word, reconciling with the dictatorship Over here I have a different triptych. These here are, I call this triptych the Changing the Foundations. The piece on the left is Oslo, the centerpiece is Montreal, and the far right piece is Paris. So last year I was also fortunate to go to Scandinavia and I saw Oslo. And if you recall, there was in 2011 the terrorist attack. It left an indelible scar on that country. They're still dealing with it, but they are doing such a magnificent job. I stumbled upon the museum that commemorated the event, but it also serves as an education center, and it's extremely child-friendly. So what happens there is they try to inform people the dangers of conspiracy theories and how that can actually lead to fatalities. Because it was just a regular Norwegian nationalist that became very right-wing and radicalized. And he decided that he would bomb the government buildings in the center of the city, and then he went out to Utoya Island and then began to systematically shoot the campers there. This one here, for anybody that's in Canada, the Montreal Massacre, you may remember, from 1989. This is a case of femicide. It is commemorated every year. I was fortunate enough to go a few years back. They had the 30th anniversary. But it was a case of a young man who thought that women were taking his place in the engineering school. So he decided to come up with the solution whereby he then shot 14 women. It was really a scarring thing. It certainly made an effect on the Canadian psyche. And then this far right one was the Paris attacks of 2015. So everybody remembers that. There were multiple attacks and several people were killed. It was shocking, almost as shocking as 9/11. The commonality with all these pieces is they've each created a foundation or some sort of organization to educate people for the future, to commemorate. So Oslo has its museum. Montreal has the White Ribbon Campaign, as well as they have scholarships for the students at the École Polytechnique, which is a university in Montreal. And in 2 years' time, Paris should have a museum dedicated to the effects of terrorism. So it is quite a stunning thing there. Then I switch back over here. I have some more pieces from the Enlightenment series. These are quite different again. I explore other shapes. They're not just circles, and they are much more photorealistic. So you can see here that you can actually see parts of the photo. And this here, the source image, was actually the doors of Notre Dame in Paris, France. This is before the fire. Over here, this is an old synagogue that was then converted to a church in Toledo, Spain. And then this far right one is just a small detail of the Mysl synagogue in Prague, Czech Republic. And just for something on the by the way, it happens to be Jewish Heritage Month. So that works out rather well. Around the corner here, we have some pieces that I showed last year in Toronto. These are actually tapestries or banners. They're printed on fabric. I have in there a new piece that is actually a photographic print. But these tapestries here are different communities, ethnic communities within Toronto itself. So this was, the basis of this image is a Hindu temple. And then I will skip over this one for the second. This here is to represent the Chinese community in Toronto, but I would imagine it could represent any of the Chinese Canadians. It doesn't have any religious significance. It's just a welcoming gate to Chinatown East in Toronto. This here was part of the facade of a Sikh temple. And when I was taking these pictures, I was kindly invited in for a tour. And it was a rather amazing experience because we were still wrapped up in the middle of COVID, and it was just kind of nice to find out that, people are people regardless of race, religion, and even language barriers. And then this here is a composite from the Ismaili Center in Toronto, so technically a mosque. And it was one of the first ones that I created in this section here. So I am going to switch this around to myself here, and that's too much backlighting, so I will just show you this here, the gallery view once again. You can see it's quite an extensive space. I did forget that one last piece there. I will mention that because that was a special trip. This one here, when I was in South America, in Santiago, Chile, I had the opportunity to visit the Baha'i temple there. And you can't really see it. You really have to see these pieces in person. But this background is part of the walls there. They're made up of these special parts of fused glass. And then the 9 rings in the center that converge, that was part of the top of the dome. You'll just have to Google Baha'i Temple South America and you will see it. The original. It was quite an amazing experience. I decided to include it in this portion of the show. So once again, thank you for coming. And I hope to see you then possibly at 2 o'clock when we have a talk with the gallery curator and as well the red-haired archaeologist. Thanks so much. Bye now.